The wreckage of the Sethkari vanguard was still cooling when Commander Tyrell Marsh decided he had been wrong about everything. Not about the engagement itself. The engagement had gone exactly as the tactical models predicted, give or take 11 seconds of margin that nobody on the bridge would ever forget. The Sethkari had come in fast, 97 pursuit-class hulls, running a crescent interception pattern designed to pin a target against the gravity well of Oregon 6 and strip it apart with converging fire lanes. It was a hunting formation. The Sethkari were hunters. They had been hunters for 9,000 years, and they had refined the crescent intercept into something closer to instinct than doctrine. Every species they had ever run down had died inside that crescent. 41 species, 9 millennia, a perfect record. The TSN Gallowmark had broken that record in 14 minutes. 14 minutes from the moment the first Sethkari hull crossed weapons range to the moment the last one stopped transmitting. 97 pursuit-class warships, each one a 300-meter Predator hull built around a single massive kinetic lance and a propulsion system that could sustain 12G acceleration for hours. Against them, one ship. One Terran Strategic Navy heavy cruiser, 740 meters of angular dark gray alloy, crew complement of 219, deployed on a patrol mission that was supposed to be routine. 14 minutes, 97-0. And Commander Tyrell Marsh, standing on the command deck of the ship that had just done the impossible, felt nothing but the cold certainty that he had almost gotten every single one of his people killed. I should explain, not the battle. The battle is already in the tactical logs, and the logs are precise enough that the Navy's after-action review board will have no trouble reconstructing the sequence of events down to the millisecond. What I need to explain is how a man who had spent 23 years in the Terran Strategic Navy, who had commanded the Gallowmark for 4 of those years, who had drilled his crew until they could execute a full defensive pivot in under 90 seconds, who had earned 2 commendations and 1 formal reprimand, and who kept both on his wall because the reprimand taught him more, came within 11 seconds of ordering the wrong response to a threat he had never trained for. 11 seconds. That was the margin. That was how close I came to killing 219 people because I was afraid of what the ship could do. Let me go back, not to the beginning. The beginning is just patrol routes and coffee, and the low hum of the ventilation system cycling filtered air through compartments that smell like ozone and recycled atmosphere. The beginning is nothing. I want to go back to the moment I understood what we were facing, and then forward through the hours when I failed to act, and then to the 11 seconds when everything changed. The Sethkari found us 17 hours before the engagement. We were running a standard patrol sweep through the Oregon Transit Corridor, a stretch of deep space between 2 colonized systems that the Navy maintained as a commercial shipping lane. The kind of patrol where the biggest decision of the day is whether to run the weekly damage control drill at 800 or 900. I chose 800 because I wanted the crew sharp, and because I had learned from my first commanding officer, Captain Naismith, that a crew left idle before noon starts inventing problems to fill the silence. Naismith had commanded the TSN Ashkaran for 11 years before she retired, and she had a saying that I wrote on a card and taped to the inside of my locker. If the crew is bored, you are failing them. Keep them working. Keep them ready. The day you let them drift is the day the universe tests you. At 1342 local, Sensor Officer Petras flagged a contact at extreme passive range. Single return. Moving fast. Bearing 093 by +7. Closing at a velocity that put it outside the performance envelope of any commercial vessel in the Navy's database. Contact profile does not match any registered traffic in this corridor, Petras reported. His voice had that particular flatness that sensor officers develop when they are looking at something they cannot explain and do not want to speculate about until they have more data. Petras was 29 years old, slim, precise, with a habit of adjusting his spectacles when he was thinking hard. He had been aboard the Galactic for 2 years and had the best passive scan detection rate of any sensor officer in the patrol wing. Designating contact Sierra 1, speed and heading suggest a military-grade propulsion system. No transponder. No hailing response. I ordered passive tracking and held station. Standard procedure. A single fast-moving contact in a transit corridor could be anything: a courier, a smuggler, a sensor ghost bounced off a brown dwarf's magnetic field. You do not go to battle stations over a single contact. You watch. You wait. You let the data accumulate until it tells you something you can act on. The data accumulated. Over the next 6 hours, Sierra 1 became Sierra 1 through Sierra 14. 14 contacts, running in a loose formation that Petra's identified as a screening pattern. Scouts. Something larger was behind them, using the scouts as forward eyes while it assembled the geometry of the kill. By 2000, we had resolved the main body. 83 additional contacts, holding formation approximately 400,000 kilometers behind the scout line. Combined with the 14 scouts, 97 warships. The formation geometry was distinctive. Petra's pulled it up on the tactical display and overlaid it against the Navy's threat archive. The match was immediate and exact. "Sethkari Crescent Intercept," he said. "Textbook configuration. They are running a hunt." The bridge went quiet, not the silence of shock, the silence of professionals absorbing information and beginning to calculate. Lieutenant Rise, the officer of the watch, straightened in his chair and began entering the pre-engagement checklist into his station without being asked. At the helm, Ensign Torval, 24 years old and 2 years out of the academy, checked the maneuvering thruster status display, and then checked it again. Not because she doubted the reading, but because checking twice was what disciplined officers did when the numbers on the tactical display were the kind that preceded very bad days. The sethkari. I had read the files. Every commanding officer in the Navy reads the files on every known hostile-capable species within operational range, and the sethkari file was one of the thicker ones. Predator species. Obligate carnivores evolved from pack hunters on a heavy-gravity world with 3 times Earth's surface pull. Bipedal, broad-chested, with dense musculature and wide-set eyes that gave them nearly 360-degree peripheral vision. Their homeworld had selected for speed, coordination, and the ability to run prey to exhaustion over distances measured in days. 9,000 years spacefaring. A civilization built entirely around the hunt. Their government was a hierarchy of kill counts. Their economy ran on trophy exchange. Their religion was a death liturgy that promised the greatest hunters an eternal chase through the cosmos after death. They had never lost a hunt. 41 species brought to surrender or extinction by the Crescent Intercept, not all of them weak. The Tesserae Convergence had fielded 900 ships against a sethkari crescent of 200, and lasted 11 hours before the crescent closed. The Helistari Compact had developed dedicated jamming countermeasures, and the sethkari had adapted within a single engagement by switching to optical signaling. The Vithrani Ascendancy had tried to out-catalog them, analyzing the crescent's geometry for structural weaknesses, and had concluded that the formation had none exploitable by any existing weapons system within the reaction time available. Their doctrine was simple, refined across millennia: find, surround, compress, kill. The crescent formation was the spatial equivalent of a wolf pack's pincer. The tips moved faster than the center, curving around the target's flanks, driving it toward a fixed point where the entire formation could converge and deliver killing fire from every angle simultaneously. No target had ever escaped the crescent once it was fully closed, and 97 of them were aimed at us. I remember standing at the tactical display, looking at those red contacts arranged in a crescent that was slowly, methodically curving around the Galactic's position, and feeling something I had not felt since my first year at the academy. Doubt. Not fear. Fear is a physical response. Your heart rate climbs, your palms sweat, your vision narrows. I had felt fear before. Fear I understood. Fear was manageable. Doubt was different. Doubt was the voice that said, "You do not know what this ship can do." I had commanded the Galactic for 4 years. I knew her displacement, her acceleration curve, her weapon loadout, her sensor range, her damage control protocols, her crew roster down to the newest enlisted rating's middle name. I knew the ship the way a surgeon knows an instrument. But knowing the specifications of a weapon, and knowing what it feels like to pull the trigger are different things, and the truth that settled into my chest as I watched 97 Predator hulls closing on my position was this: I had never fired the Galactic's primary weapons system in anger. Not once, not in 4 years of command, not in 23 years of service. The weapon I am talking about is the Meridian Array. It was installed during the Galactic's last refit, 18 months before I took command, as part of a fleet-wide upgrade program that the Admiralty designated Project Threshold. The technical specifications were classified at a level I had to request special clearance to read, and what I read when I got that clearance made me sit very still for a long time in a secure briefing room at Ganymede Station, while the implications settled over me like cold water. The Meridian Array was a directed energy weapon system that used the ship's main reactor as a direct power source, not a capacitor bank, not a step-down feed. The reactor itself, channeled through a crystalline focusing assembly that ran the entire length of the ship's dorsal spine, from the engineering section to the bow emitter. When the array fired, it consumed 62% of the ship's total power output for the duration of the beam. Life support dropped to emergency minimums. Artificial gravity cut to half. The lights dimmed to red. Every non-essential system aboard the Galactic shut down so that one weapon could operate at full power. The beam itself was a coherent energy discharge with a focal diameter of less than 2 meters at a range of 10,000 kilometers. At maximum output, it could sustain fire for 19 seconds before the focusing crystals required a cooling cycle. In those 19 seconds, at that focal precision, it could cut through any known armor composite in the Navy's threat database. Any of them, including the sethkari's laminate hull plating, which was rated to withstand 3 simultaneous hits from standard ship-to-ship torpedoes. 19 seconds, one beam through anything. And I had never fired it, because in 4 years of patrols, 2 border incidents, and 1 escort mission that turned hostile, I had never faced a situation that warranted pulling 62% of my ship's power out of every other system and putting it into a single weapon that would leave us blind, deaf, and half-crippled for the 37 seconds it took the crystals to cool. 37 seconds, that was the vulnerability window. For 37 seconds after a full power discharge, the Galactic would be running on 38% power. No main sensors, no point defense, no maneuvering thrusters above emergency minimum. If something was still shooting at us after the beam cut, we would be absorbing hits with nothing but passive armor and hope. Against a single opponent, the math was acceptable. Against 97 opponents, running a formation designed to ensure that something was always shooting at the target from multiple angles, the math was suicide. I said this to my executive officer, Lieutenant Commander Annika Voss, in my quarters at 2130, while the Sethkari Crescent continued its slow encirclement. The array is a dual weapon, I told her. It was designed to kill one thing at a time. We are facing 97 things. Voss was a compact woman with short gray hair and the kind of eyes that missed nothing and forgave less. She had been my executive officer for 3 years. She was smarter than me, which I had never admitted to her but which she certainly knew. "You are describing a reason not to use our strongest weapon," she said. "What are you proposing instead?" Standard engagement doctrine. Rail guns, torpedoes, point defense. Fight them at range, use our superior fire control to attrit the formation. She looked at me for a long time. Voss had a way of looking at people that made them feel like she was reading the serial numbers on their bones. Commander, our rail guns cycle every 4.2 seconds. Our torpedo magazines hold 160 rounds. Standard doctrine gives us a kill rate of approximately 1 hull per 90 seconds. Clearing 97 targets takes approximately 2 hours and 26 minutes of continuous combat. Their kinetic lances have an effective range of 8,000 kilometers. At current closing speed, they reach lance range in approximately 4 hours. The survival probability under sustained multi-angle kinetic bombardment from 80-plus platforms is not a number I want to calculate. The array changes the math, she continued. 1 shot, 1 kill, 56-second total cycle. We can engage 97 targets in approximately 90 minutes. She was right. The Meridian array was the only weapon that could kill 97 targets fast enough, and I could not make myself trust it. The simulation said it would work. The engineering report said the focusing crystals were rated for continuous cycling. Everything said yes. But specifications lie. They tell you what a system can do in theory. They do not tell you what it will do when the hull is shaking and the enemy has 9,000 years of hunting experience. I did not trust the weapon because I had never seen it work, and the one lesson beaten into me over 23 years was this: never stake your crew's lives on something you have not personally verified. So I hesitated. For 2 hours while the Sethkari crescent tightened, I ran conventional plans. I repositioned along the least compressed axis. I ran rail gun targeting drills. I had Chief Engineer Reyes stress test the reactor's secondary cooling loops. I had Petras track every hull's acceleration profile, building a picture that was comprehensive and useless because I already knew what it showed. 97 Predator hulls, 1 cruiser, a crescent closing. At 23:40, Reyes called from engineering. Commander, the array has been sitting at idle for 4 years. I have personally inspected the crystalline matrix 17 times. The thermal stress tolerances are within 3% of factory baseline. Everything is nominal. I am telling you this because I think you need to hear it from someone who has had their hands on the hardware. At midnight, Weapons Officer Cade requested a private word. He showed me a datapad with 18 months of targeting calibration data. Commander, I have written custom targeting solutions for every species in the threat archive, including this one. He scrolled to a file labeled sethkari laminate PROT3. This profile accounts for their armor thickness distribution, their structural weak points at the nacelle-to-hull junction, and their reactor shielding geometry. If we fire using this profile, the beam hits their most vulnerable point every time. He was not being insubordinate, he was being precise. He had spent 18 months preparing the array to kill exactly what we were now facing. The work was sitting on a datapad in front of me ready, while I was running rail gun drills against a threat that rail guns could not defeat. I dismissed him and sat in my ready room for 11 minutes, staring at a scratch on the bulkhead from a coffee mug that had slid loose during a hard burn 2 years ago. The ship carried the evidence of everything it had survived. The scratch, the repaired hull plating from the border incident, the misaligned duct in Corridor 7 that whistled above 80%, the crew who had lived and worked inside this angular, stripped-down hull for years. At 23:45, Voss came to the ready room. She did not knock, she never knocked. She opened the hatch, stepped inside, and stood with her back against the frame in the way that meant she was not leaving until something had been resolved. "You are running out of time," she said. "I am aware of the time. You are running out of time to make the decision you have already made." I looked at her. Voss had a gift for stating things that sounded like disagreement, but were actually a kind of surgical honesty. She was not telling me what to do. She was telling me what I was doing, which was worse, because it meant she could see the doubt and I could not hide it behind procedure. The conventional engagement plan is viable, I said. The conventional engagement plan is a way to use the ship without using the ship. You know the difference. I did, that was the problem. The railgun plan was a way to fight 97 warships while pretending the Meridian Array did not exist. It was a way to go into combat with a weapon I controlled, understood, had verified in exercises and border skirmishes, and one ugly night near the Pelari exclusion zone, where a smuggler's escort corvette had decided to test the Gallowmark's point defense and learned the answer in 4 seconds. I had never once fired the Meridian Array at a live target. The simulator runs did not count. Simulators do not shake. Simulators do not have 219 people inside them, whose lives depend on the focusing crystals holding tolerance through 97 consecutive firing cycles, something no crystal assembly had ever been asked to do in a combat environment. "What are you actually afraid of?" Voss asked, not unkindly, not gently either, with the flat precision of an officer who needed to understand the problem in order to solve it. "Crystal failure at cycle 30, I said, or 40, or 60, some number between 1 and 97 where the thermal stress exceeds the factory tolerance and the focusing assembly microfractures, and we lose main armament with 50 hostile contacts still inbound. What does the engineering data say?" "That it will hold." "What does Ray say?" "That it will hold." "What does the crystal inspection log say?" "That it will hold." "What does your experience say?" I was quiet for a moment. My experience says that specifications lie, that factory tolerances are tested in clean rooms, not in combat. That the gap between what a system can do in theory and what it does when someone is shooting at you is the gap where people die. Voss crossed her arms. "Your experience is correct. Specifications do lie. Factory tolerances are optimistic. The gap is real. But you are applying a general truth to a specific system you have never tested and concluding that because you have never tested it, the specific system must fail. That is not caution. That is superstition." The word landed like a slap. Not because it was wrong, because it was precisely right, and I had been calling it something else for 4 years. Superstition. I had dressed it in the language of prudence. Conservative doctrine, measured risk, trust but verify. All the vocabulary that a career officer accumulates to describe the practice of never relying on something you have not personally seen work. But Voss was right. There was a line between prudence and superstition, and I had crossed it years ago, when I first read the Meridian Array specifications, and felt that cold weight settle into my chest, and decided, without ever articulating the decision, that I would use every other weapon aboard the Gallowmark before I used that one. She left. She did not wait for a response. That was Voss. She delivered the diagnosis and let you sit with it. She did not prescribe the treatment because she trusted you to prescribe it yourself, and if she was wrong about that trust, she would find out soon enough. I sat in the ready room for another 7 minutes. The duct in corridor 7 whistled. The coffee mug scratch on the bulkhead caught the red emergency lighting and looked like a scar. At midnight I walked to the bridge and called the senior staff to the tactical display. Petras, Cade, Rise, Torval at the helm, Voss, who had been standing at her station as if she had never left. "Show me the crescent geometry," I said. Petras put it on the display. 97 red contacts. The crescent covered 204 degrees of arc around our position, tips extending past our beam, center mass at the bow. The compression rate had increased again. They were tightening faster now. The scout line had pushed within 300,000 kilometers. Another 4 hours to weapons range. Maybe less if the scouts' acceleration profiles were a deliberate underestimate, which they probably were because the Sethkari had 9 millennia of experience in making prey believe it had more time than it did. Cade walked me through the firing sequence, every step. Cade stood and began. He was methodical in the way that weapons officers are when they know their commander is making a decision, not requesting information. He described the power transition. 62% of reactor output redirected from all non-essential systems through the dorsal conduit array into the crystalline focusing chamber. He described the targeting sequence. His custom sethkari profile locked to the servo tracking system, real-time adjustment for target maneuvers, focal point calibrated to the nacelle hull junction, where the laminate armor was structurally thinnest. He described the beam characteristics. Coherent energy discharge, sub-2-meter focal diameter at 10,000 kilometers, sustained for between 3 and 5 seconds depending on target aspect angle and relative velocity. He described the cooling cycle, 37 seconds of reduced power, while the crystal matrix shed thermal energy through the dorsal heat exchangers. He described what the ship would feel like during that 37 seconds. Lights at emergency red, gravity at 40%, sensors at passive only, point defense on autonomous targeting with no manual override available. And the crystal stress, I asked. Cumulative thermal load across 97 consecutive cycles at full output places the matrix at approximately 71% of its rated maximum thermal capacity. The safety margin is 29%. That margin accounts for combat vibration, power fluctuation from reactor stress, and ambient thermal bleed from hull impacts. 71%. I looked at the number. 29% margin. In any other context, a 29% margin would be comfortable, generous, even. But this was not any other context. This was one weapon system cycling 97 times, while 97 warships tried to kill us during every 37-second window. The margin holds if the reactor maintains output within 2% of nominal, Cade continued. Ray's reactor has held within 1.3% on every diagnostic for the past 18 months. The last time the reactor fluctuated beyond 2% was during the secondary cooling loop replacement 3 years ago, and that was a maintenance event, not a combat event. I looked at the display. I looked at Voss, who was watching me with those gray eyes that missed nothing. I looked at Petras, who was monitoring the sethkari compression rate with the focused attention of a man who understood that the numbers on his display were a countdown. I looked at Torval at the helm, 24 years old, her hands resting on the maneuvering controls, waiting. "We will engage with the Meridian array at weapons range," I said. "Cade, load the custom targeting profile. Petras, I want continuous passive tracking on all 97 contacts with priority designation on the command vessel. Torval, plot a nose-on approach to the nearest crescent element. Rise, damage control teams to stations. Voss, set condition red throughout the ship." It was not conviction, not yet. It was the decision to stop pretending I had an alternative, which was the first step toward conviction, and which felt, in that moment, like stepping off a ledge. The next 2 hours were the longest of my career, not because of the waiting. Waiting I could do. 23 years of patrol had taught me how to wait. The longest hours were because I had committed to a weapon I did not fully trust, and every minute between the commitment and the engagement was a minute in which the doubt had nothing to do except grow. At 100 I walked the ship, not an inspection, just a walk. Down the central corridor from the bridge to engineering, past the crew quarters where the off-watch personnel were sleeping or trying to sleep, past the damage control staging area, where teams had laid out their equipment with the methodical precision of people who had done it 700 times and would do it 700 more, past the galley where the cook, a petty officer named Estrada who had been aboard since before I took command, was making coffee because Estrada always made coffee before an engagement, not because anyone had ordered it, but because she believed, with a conviction I envied, that people who were about to risk their lives deserved hot coffee first. I stopped in engineering. Reyes was at his console, running what looked like the same diagnostic he had been running all evening. Behind him, visible through the transparent safety partition, the reactor core glowed with a steady blue-white light that I had seen every day for 4 years and never once thought about. You do not think about the reactor the way you do not think about your own heartbeat. It is there. It works. You trust it the way you trust gravity. And now I was asking it to do something it had never done. Pour 62% of its output into a weapon and hold that output stable through 97 cycles while the ship absorbed kinetic impacts. "How does it look?" I asked. Reyes did not look up from his console. "Same as it looked 2 hours ago, Commander. Same as it looked 2 hours before that. Same as it has looked every day since the last refit. The reactor does not change its mind about being reliable." I appreciated the rebuke. Reyes had been the Gallowmark's chief engineer for 6 years, 2 years longer than I had been her commander. He had maintained the reactor through 2 border incidents, 1 escort engagement, 4 scheduled refits, and 1,147 days of routine patrol. He knew the reactor the way I knew the bridge, which is to say he knew it with the bone-deep familiarity that comes from years of daily attention. "The dorsal conduit array," I said. "The power transition from standard to array feed, how fast?" 3.1 seconds from the order to full power at the focusing chamber. The conduit array has been load tested at full output 17 times during maintenance cycles. 17 clean transitions, 0 anomalies. I nodded. I left engineering and walked back to the bridge. The central corridor was 740 meters of gray alloy and recirculated air, lined with conduit runs and maintenance panels, and the small personal markers that a crew leaves on a ship. A hand-drawn star chart taped to a bulkhead outside the navigation office. A maintenance crew's tally of completed hull inspections scratched into the paint near frame 47. A photograph of someone's daughter tucked behind a pipe bracket at head height. A ship is a weapon, but a ship is also a home. The two are not in conflict. The weapon works because the people inside it have made it home, and people defend their home with a ferocity that no engineering specification can measure. I returned to the bridge at 1:45. Voss was where I had left her. The tactical display showed the crescent at 208 degrees of encirclement, compression rate accelerating. The scout line was inside 200,000 kilometers and closing. 1 hour to weapons range, Petrus said. I stood at my station. The doubt was still there, but something else was there too, underneath it, quieter building. I had walked the ship. I had seen the damage control teams and their 700 drills. I had seen Estrada's coffee and Reyes' reactor and the scratched tally marks near frame 47. I had seen a crew that had made this weapon their home and trusted every system aboard it because they worked with those systems every day. The doubt said, "You have never fired this weapon." The quieter thing said, "They have, not literally, but every diagnostic, every maintenance cycle, every load test, every calibration run, every inspection of the crystalline matrix, they had been firing this weapon for 4 years in every way except pulling the trigger. The crew had verified it. Reyes had verified it. Cade had verified it. The ship had verified it every day in the steady hum of the reactor and the clean glow of the focusing chamber status light and the 17 consecutive clean load tests. I had been waiting for personal verification. Standing at the trigger, feeling the recoil, watching the beam hit. But personal verification was what the next hour would provide. And if I waited for it before I committed, I would be committing after the crescent closed, which was not commitment but capitulation. The weapon ran through the spine of this ship. The power came from the reactor I relied on every second. The targeting used the same servo architecture as the sensors I navigated by. If I trusted the ship, I trusted the weapon. If I did not trust the weapon, I did not trust the ship. There was no middle position. I did not reach this conclusion in the ready room. I reached it 11 seconds before weapons range, when Voss said 5 words. At 200, the Sethkari scouts reached passive scan range. They swept the Galactic with methodical thoroughness. Petras reported. The crescent was tightening, compression rate up 40%. They had measured us and concluded that one cruiser was a kill. By conventional doctrine, they were right. What they had not scanned, shielded behind the densest armor, composite the Terran Strategic Navy manufactured, was the meridian array running the length of the dorsal spine. The thing that made the Galactic not a cruiser carrying weapons, but a weapon shaped like a cruiser. At 2:47, lead elements crossed into weapons range. The formation covered 210 degrees around us, open sector at the stern, driving us toward the gravity well. The classic crescent endgame. Weapons range in 45 seconds, Petras reported. I stood at the tactical display. 97 red contacts, 219 crew. 11 seconds before weapons range, Voss spoke. She did not raise her voice. She did not turn to face me. She was standing at her station, hands flat on the console. The weapon is the ship. I looked at her. You have been treating the array as something separate, an attachment, a thing you have not verified, but the array runs through the spine. It draws from the reactor. It is the Galactic. You have been trusting this ship for 4 years. Trust the ship. 5 seconds. I opened the fleet-wide channel. All hands, this is the commander. Meridian array to full power. All non-essential systems to standby. Point defense to autonomous mode. Helm, nose on to Sierra 1. Weapons, firing solutions on the first 12 targets. Priority sequence using Cade's custom profile. We are going to cut the crescent open. The Galactic came alive. The lights dropped to red. The deck vibration changed frequency as the reactor climbed from 61% to 100. A deep harmonic I felt in my teeth, my sternum, the bones of my feet. Environmental systems throttled down. Gravity shifted aft. On the weapons panel, the Meridian Array indicator transitioned from standby amber to ready green. It was the only system at full capacity. Everything else had stepped back. Array at full charge, Cade reported. Custom targeting profile loaded. Focal diameter 2.1 meters. Crystal temperature nominal. Awaiting your order. Fire. The beam left the bow emitter as a column of coherent light less than 2 meters wide and crossed 10,000 kilometers in a fraction of a heartbeat. It struck Sierra 1 at the nacelle junction, exactly where Cade's profile predicted the structural integrity was weakest, and went through. Clean. Precise. The 300-meter hull separated into 2 halves that drifted apart with the slow motion of something that had stopped being whole. Atmosphere vented in a crystalline cloud. Running lights died in sequence. The kinetic lance fired once into empty space on residual power, then went dark. 3.7 seconds of beam contact. 1 ship dead. Target destroyed. Cooling cycle 37 seconds. The crescent adjusted. 96 hulls tightened. Flanking elements accelerated to fill the gap. Doctrine: absorb losses, maintain compression. Second cycle. The beam found Sierra 3 at the base of its kinetic lance mount. The lance assembly lasted 1.9 seconds before the beam burned through. The lance detonated inside its housing. The forward third came apart. Third cycle. Sierra 7, a flanking element that had pushed ahead. The beam caught it at the port engine nacelle. The nacelle separated cleanly, sending the ship into an uncontrolled tumble. It fired its lance twice during the spin, both shots wide by kilometers. Fourth, fifth, sixth. A main-body hull broke formation and charged during a cooling cycle. It came fast enough that Petras showed it reaching lance range 3 seconds before the cycle ended. The sethkari hull fired. A 400-kilogram tungsten slug at 3% of lightspeed struck the Galactic's portside armor at a shallow angle and skipped off, gouging a furrow 12 meters long and 2 meters deep. Damage alarms on 3 decks. The hull shuddered, but the armor held. When the cycle ended, Cade put the beam through the charging hull's reactor section. Containment failure. A brief white flare. After the 7th kill, I noticed something on the tactical display. The elements nearest the Gallowmark were still pursuing with desperate acceleration. But the elements on the far side of the crescent, the ones that had seen the kills only as data in their tactical network, were behaving differently. Their acceleration had dropped. Their spacing was widening. The pack instinct that had held the crescent together for 9,000 years was fracturing along the seam between doctrine and evidence. Kill 8, Kill 9. Kill 10 was different. A slightly larger hull, 320 meters with an elaborate sensor array. The command vessel. When the beam struck it at the junction of its communication nexus and central power node, the ship did not separate cleanly. It crumpled. The internal structure collapsed inward as power distribution failed across every section simultaneously, and the hull folded like foil. The tactical network stuttered. For 4 seconds, coordination between elements degraded visibly on Petra's display. 4 seconds during which the crescent was not a formation, but a collection of individual ships trying to remember what to do without the signal telling them. The secondary command vessel picked up coordination within those 4 seconds, but every crew in that formation had felt the moment when the pack lost its alpha. Something shifted in the quality of their maneuvering. The formations were slightly looser now, the acceleration profiles slightly more erratic. The 9,000-year-old instincts that said hold the crescent were now fighting against newer, rawer instincts that said this hunt is wrong. The prey does not bleed. The prey is not weakening. Something has changed. Kill 11. A pursuit-class hull on the southern arc that had been maintaining a textbook flanking position. The beam cut it from bow to midships. Both halves tumbled outward, clearing a gap in the formation that the adjacent elements were slow to fill. Slower than doctrine demanded. Slower than the Sethkari had ever been. Kill 12. Another flanking element. This one attempted evasive maneuvering during the beam contact, a high-G lateral thrust that should have carried it out of the focal track. Cade's custom targeting profile adjusted in real time, the servo tracking following the evasion with a precision that reduced the effective dodge to 0. The beam held contact for 4.1 seconds, slightly longer than average because the lateral motion spread the incision across a wider hull section. The result was the same. The ship came apart. Kill 13. A hull from the main body that had accelerated into the gap left by Kill 12, either trying to maintain formation integrity or simply carried forward by momentum and doctrine. The beam caught it amidships. The kill was clean, instantaneous, so precise that the two halves drifted parallel for 3 seconds before tidal forces began to pull them apart. On the bridge of the Gallowmark, Cade made a small adjustment to his targeting parameters. I did not ask what it was. I did not need to. Kill 14 was the breaking point. The crescent shattered. Not a clean break, not a tactical redeployment. Individual hulls broke formation in every direction. Some accelerated toward the Gallowmark in a final desperate charge. Others decelerated and turned, engine signatures redlining as ships tried to reverse course. The formation that had killed 41 species across 9 millennia came apart the way a pane of glass comes apart when the fracture reaches the edge. They broke because the Gallowmark was not degrading. Each shot was as precise as the last. Each kill was clean. The weapon did not tire. The weapon did not flinch. It did not make mistakes born of fatigue or fear. They were not fighting a ship. They were fighting a category of weapon their 9,000-year archive did not contain. The hunt had reversed itself, and the thing they had been hunting was hunting them back with a patience and precision that made their own predator instincts look like crude approximation. The final phase lasted 6 minutes. The fleeing elements ran at maximum acceleration. Propulsion systems pushed past rated limits. The charging elements came in desperate, firing kinetic lances at maximum cycle rate, filling space with tungsten slugs. 2 more impacts on the Gallowmark. A hull breach on Deck 7 that the damage control team sealed in 90 seconds. A power conduit failure in the secondary weapons bay that Rays rerouted before the next firing cycle. Kill 15 through 20 came fast, the targets presenting themselves in the disorder of their own broken formation. Hulls that had been turning to flee showed their reactor sections to the Gallowmark's bow. Hulls that were charging came in on predictable vectors that Cade's targeting solutions ate alive. The Meridian array cycled with metronomic consistency. 56 seconds. One kill. 56 seconds. Another. Somewhere around kill 25, the remaining sethkari stopped communicating on their tactical network entirely. Whether the secondary command vessel had been killed or had simply abandoned the coordinating role, Petras could not determine. It did not matter. Without coordination, the crescent was not a formation. It was a scattering field of individual predator hulls, each one reverting to the solo hunt instincts of their evolutionary ancestors, and solo hunt instincts against a weapon designed for methodical sequential engagement was the worst possible response. They presented themselves one at a time, each one isolated, each one tracked, each one killed with the same unhurried precision as the first. The last sethkari hull, a pursuit-class ship that had been running at maximum burn away from the engagement for 4 minutes, stopped transmitting at the 14-minute mark. The array's final shot caught it at extreme range. Reactor containment failure. A brief flare of white, there and then gone. 97-0, 14 minutes. One hull breach sealed. 2 armor gouges. 0 casualties. 0 failures on the Meridian array. The focusing crystals at the end of 97 firing cycles showed 0 microfractures. The reactor output had held stable within 1.3% of nominal throughout the entire engagement. Cade's custom targeting profile had achieved a 97% first-hit structural kill rate. The 3% margin was accounted for by the hull that attempted evasive maneuvering, which required an additional half-second of beam contact. Afterwards, the bridge was quiet, the silence of recalibration, Petras running post-engagement sweeps, Cade running diagnostics, treating the array with the careful attention of a man who understood what he was responsible for. Below decks, damage control teams were already patching the hull breach on Deck 7, the work methodical and unhurried because the threat was gone, and the work was the kind of straightforward structural repair that the crew had drilled 712 times. In engineering, Rays was running a full power system diagnostic, verifying every conduit and junction along the dorsal spine, making certain the array would be ready for the next time. He did not say if there was a next time. He said the next time. The certainty of it was in his voice, the way the certainty of the weapon was in the spine of the ship. Voss stood at her station. She had not spoken since those 5 words. She did not need to. The ship had spoken for her. I stood at the tactical display, looking at the debris field that had been 97 warships. Alloy fragments, frozen atmosphere, fading thermal signatures of reactors that would never power another hunt. Below us, the ship hummed. The reactor was already throttling back to patrol output. The Meridian array's status indicator had returned to standby amber, the crystal matrix cooling at its nominal rate, the thermal load readout showing cumulative stress at 68% of maximum, 3% under Cade's projection. The crystals had performed better than the specifications predicted, because specifications are conservative and reality. When everything is maintained and calibrated and tested by people who care about their work, occasionally outperforms the paperwork. Rays called from engineering. His voice was the same flat professional tone it had been all night. Reactor output stable at 61.4%. Dorsal conduit array nominal. Crystal matrix thermal decay on schedule. No anomalies. Engineering recommends a full diagnostic at the next scheduled maintenance window, but for the record, Commander, every system performed within design parameters. For the record, Reyes was already writing the engineering log in his head. He would file a report that was precise, comprehensive, and devoid of any mention of the fact that his commanding officer had spent 2 hours doubting the systems that Reyes had maintained for 6 years. He would note the reactor's performance, the conduit transitions, the crystal thermal profile, and he would do it with the professional detachment of a man who had always known the hardware would hold and had been waiting for the rest of the ship to catch up. Cade was running his own diagnostics, but I saw him pause, pull up the targeting log, and scroll through 97 entries, 97 firing events, 97 kills. He was reading them the way a surgeon reads post-operative notes, not with satisfaction but with the careful attention of a professional confirming that the work was clean. When he reached the end, he saved the log, closed it, and began recalibrating the array for standby. No celebration, no comment. The weapon had done what the weapon was designed to do. The operator had done what the operator was trained to do. There was nothing to celebrate. There was only the next cycle. Petras secured the passive array and began a systematic sweep of the debris field, cataloging every fragment larger than a meter across. The debris field was enormous. 97 warships reduced to components in 14 minutes produces a volume of wreckage that takes hours to map. Some of it was drifting in loose ellipses around Oregon's 6-gravity well. Some of it was on escape trajectories, tumbling outward into the transit corridor at velocities that would make it a navigation hazard for commercial traffic. Petras was already flagging the high-velocity fragments for the hazard report that the Navy would need before reopening the corridor. Torval had the helm locked on station keeping. Her hands were still on the maneuvering controls. I noticed she was gripping them harder than necessary, the knuckles white, and I understood that she had been gripping them that way for the entire engagement. 14 minutes of holding station while the ship fired and cooled and fired again, absorbing kinetic impacts and compensating for thrust changes with the manual precision of a pilot who trusted her instruments but also trusted her hands. She was 24 years old. She had just held the helm through the most one-sided engagement in recorded naval history, and she was still holding it, because no one had told her to let go, and a disciplined officer does not let go until she is told. Torval, secure the helm. Autopilot on station keeping. She blinked, looked at her hands, released the controls with the slow deliberation of someone unclenching a fist they had forgotten they were making. Aye, Commander. On Deck 7, the damage control team was finishing the hull breach repair. I could hear the status reports coming through the internal channel, calm and procedural, the practiced language of people doing work they had rehearsed until it was automatic. The breach was a 2-meter tear in the outer hull where the kinetic slug had punched through before the angle deflected it. A clean wound, as hull wounds go. The team had it sealed in 90 seconds and was reinforcing the patch with structural bonding when the last sethkari hull stopped transmitting. The doubt was gone, not suppressed. Not managed, gone, replaced by conviction. Not confidence, which is what you feel when the odds are in your favor. Conviction, which is what you feel when you understand with absolute certainty that the thing you are doing is the thing you were built to do. I wrote my after-action report that night. 3 pages, clean, factual, devoid of the 2 hours of hesitation that preceded the engagement. I did not mention the doubt. I did not mention Voss's 5 words. I did not mention the 11 seconds. But I filed a supplemental recommendation to Fleet Command, classified, requesting that the Meridian Array training program be restructured. The current program trained commanding officers in specifications, power requirements, tactical applications. It did not train them to trust it. It did not force them to fire it under conditions that felt wrong, that violated every instinct a cautious officer had spent decades building. It did not teach them the one lesson that mattered. The lesson is not about the array. The lesson is about the crew. You can build a weapon that cuts through any known armor in 3 seconds. You can mount it on a reactor that holds stable within 1.3% of nominal. You can house it in a crystalline matrix that survives 97 consecutive cycles with a 29% thermal margin. You can pair it with targeting solutions that hit the weakest structural point on every hull in the threat archive. And none of it matters if the commanding officer does not pull the trigger. The trigger is not a button. The trigger is the moment when the person responsible for 219 lives decides that the system in front of them will do what the specifications say it will do, that the maintenance logs are not optimistic fictions, that the diagnostic data reflects reality, that the people who built and maintained and calibrated and tested every component of the weapon knew what they were doing and did it well. The trigger is trust, not blind trust, not faith. Trust earned by years of work, verified by data, confirmed by the people who put their hands on the hardware every day. I did not trust the weapon until Voss told me to trust the ship, and I trusted the ship because I trusted the crew. And I trusted the crew because they had earned it every day, in ways I did not notice until 97 red contacts were closing on the tactical display, and the question was no longer abstract. The weapon is the ship is the weapon. There is no line between them, there never was. I do not know if Fleet Command accepted the recommendation. I do not know if the next commanding officer who faces a Sethkari crescent, or a Tessari convergence, or whatever else is out there with millennia of killing experience and a formation that has never failed, will hesitate the way I hesitated. I do not know if they will stand at a tactical display watching 97 red contacts close on their position and feel that cold weight. I do not know if they will have an executive officer who can say 5 words at the right moment and change everything. What I know is this: the Gallo mark is still out there. The focusing crystals passed diagnostics with 0 microfractures. The reactor held stable. The crew performed flawlessly, every one of them, from Petras at sensors to Cade at weapons to the damage control team that sealed a hull breach in 90 seconds to Ray's in engineering who kept the reactor feeding the weapon without a single fluctuation. 219 people inside a weapon that looked like a ship, doing what the weapon was designed to do. 97 warships, 14 minutes, 0 casualties. And 11 seconds of doubt that almost made it 97-1. The Sethkari Communion has not sent another hunting fleet into the Oregon corridor. Their intelligence networks will have the engagement data by now. They will analyze it with the predator patience that has sustained them for 9 millennia. They will design new formations, faster ships, heavier armor, weapons that can strike during the 37-second cooling window. They will fail, not because the Meridian Array is invincible. Nothing is. They will fail because the weapon they need to counter is not a beam or a reactor or a crystal. The weapon is a 740-meter warship designed from the keel plates to the command chair to do one thing, and it does it with a precision their 9,000-year hunting doctrine has no answer for. They will also fail because they will not understand the 11 seconds. They will study the engagement data and see a weapon system, a beam, a crystal, a reactor, and they will build countermeasures for those things. They will not see the 2 hours of hesitation. They will not see the executive officer who said 5 words. They will not see the chief engineer who ran 17 clean load tests. They will not see the weapons officer who spent 18 months writing targeting profiles for species he had never fought. They will not see the sensor officer who tracked 97 contacts with the flat comm of a professional. They will not see the helm officer who held the ship steady through 14 minutes of combat at age 24. They will not see the cook who made coffee. They will see the beam. They will counter the beam, and they will discover that the beam was never the weapon. The weapon is 219 people who maintained a ship until every system aboard it worked better than its specifications. The weapon is a chief engineer who knows his reactor the way a musician knows an instrument. The weapon is a weapons officer who wrote targeting solutions in his spare time, because precision was not his job but his identity. The weapon is a sensor officer who could track a contact at extreme passive range and report it without speculation, because speculation was beneath his training. The weapon is a damage control team that sealed a hull breach in 90 seconds because they had drilled the procedure 712 times, and the 713th was no different. The weapon is an executive officer who could look at her commanding officer and see the difference between caution and superstition, and name it, out loud, in a ready room at 23:45 with 97 hostile contacts closing. The weapon is a commanding officer who almost failed, who hesitated for 2 hours, who ran conventional plans against an unconventional threat because conventional plans were plans he trusted, and trust was the one thing the Meridian Array specifications could not provide, who needed 5 words from his executive officer and 11 seconds of clarity to do what the ship had been designed to do from the moment the first keel plate was laid. I am not proud of the hesitation. I am not ashamed of it either. The hesitation was the product of 23 years of service in which I learned correctly that the gap between specification and performance kills people. What I did not learn, until Voss taught me in 5 words, was that the gap is not fixed. It closes every time an engineer runs a diagnostic, every time a weapons officer recalibrates a targeting profile, every time a reactor holds stable through a load test. Every time a crew does their job, the gap between what a system can do and what it will do narrows, and at some point, for some systems maintained by some crews, the gap closes entirely. The Gallowmark's crew closed the gap, not in the engagement, before it, in 4 years of daily work that I took for granted because taking good work for granted is what commanding officers do when they are paying attention to the wrong things. And when they come again, the Gallowmark will be waiting, not because I am brave, not because I am certain, but because Voss was right. The weapon is the ship. The ship does not doubt itself. It never has.